My name is Anne-Louise from Minerva, and I'm here today to sew along with you this rather delightful Simplicity spring summer dress. It comes with two options, a shorter blouse and a knee-length dress. However, I'm doing a teeny bit of pattern hacking. You won't be able to tell, but I am pretty tall, and I like a good knee length, so we're going to be adding a tad onto the bottom. However, I'm sure it wouldn't take much to go full floor length or add some ruffle or trim, the endless possibilities. This fully lined dress features princess seams, some band details on the seams, sleeve and neck binding, a squared neckline and the return of my dress loves, poofy sleeves. I can't get enough of poof sleeves, it's a serious problem. They've also included a sash pattern to draw in the waist and add a bow that would make a certain Great British Sewing Bee judge very proud. This dress is recommended to be made in silky types, crepe de chine, double georgette, burnouts, soft lightweight cottons, gauze, cotton lawn and soft light linens. Of course, everything we talk about today is available on Minerva right now and will be linked down below and will pop up throughout this video for your ease of shopping. So, let's get started. Our fabric choice is this wonderfully floaty traced peach skin crepe. Peach skin is the highest quality fabric and very finely woven polyester. Because this fabric is woven so finely, it means it doesn't crease easily. Peach skin has a beautiful softness and drape while still retaining body and weight unlike anything else. It's very easy to sew with when using a fine needle and comes in a wide range of colours for all occasions. We will need our bright red thread to match our pillar box fabric. The other items we need is a light flowy lining fabric that is going to suit our suitably flowy outer fabric. We're using 1.5 cm seam allowance throughout unless otherwise stated. Our first job is to lengthen the front and back bands. I'm lengthening everything by about 4 inches to give me enough to hem everything and to still have the extra length. I'm cutting the bands at the cutting line for view B, then adding in the extra length, making sure not to disturb any of the notches that need to be lined up. I've put a 1/4 inch paper seam allowance in for ease of sticking and to save me battling with sticky tape and the most terrible paper known to man. Because the main dress pieces have a curved hem, I'm not cutting them at view B, I'm popping 4 inches on the bottom and adding the extra length on that way. On patterns with a flared skirt, they don't usually contain cutting lines to add length, but by lining up the ruler with the side lines and carrying on the outward line of the dress, we can still alter it. I haven't added the extra length onto the lining to make sure I don't get any lining peeping through. These are our pieces 1 to 9, with pieces 1, 2, 5 and 6 also cut out in our lining fabric. We're now stay stitching our front and back necklines to keep everything in place. Stay stitch with a small seam allowance as these stitches stay in permanently and you don't want them showing anyway. Also, stay stitch front and back lining pieces in the same way. Then we pin right sides together at the shoulders and stitch. Next, we're arranging our front and back bands, with right sides together matching up the notched ends. Then we fold bands together lengthwise with wrong sides together, pressing and basting. There's a lot of basting involved in this pattern as there's quite a few layers and we want to keep them all together. On the outside of our dress, we want to match the band seam with our shoulder seams, matching dots and notches together, and then we put in another basting line. Here is our progress so far, and now we jump in to the poofy sleeves. We're going to sew 2 lines of gathering stitches on the top of the sleeve between the 2 dots, using a long machine stitch. After the top gathers have been stitched, we are double checking with putting back our normal stitch length and sewing the underarm seam, and finishing the seam in our favourite way as this part isn't lined, and then stitching 2 more rows of gathering stitches along the bottom edge. We then start work on our bias cut sleeve binding, stitching the notch ends together, right sides together, pressing the seam open, and while we're at the iron, we're folding it lengthways with wrong sides together and giving it a good press. With right sides together, we then pull those bottom stitches to fit our sleeve band. Gathering stitches have been in use in clothing for centuries. This style of sleeve reminds me strongly of 18th century men's shirts, also called pirate or boho shirts today. Think Mr. Darcy dramatically emerging from a lake in one. They're some of my favourite historical clothing items, which is why I love this pattern so much. What part of history would you like to see reflected in patterns today? Let us know in the comments. When all our gathers are even and pinned in place, we flip the sleeve outside in and sew at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Sewing this way round makes sure that all our gathers stay straight and even and nothing gets caught. I then go slightly off pattern, and I confess that I am terrified of stitching in the ditch. It gives me nightmares. If you're a brave, noble sewist, then turn binding inside over the seam allowance, having the folded side extend slightly beyond the stitching line, being careful to cover the seam. Baste, then stitch in the ditch and remove your basting stitches. While you brave sewists nip round stitching in the ditch, I take the evening and hand slip stitch my binding down. Are there any sewing techniques you haven't tried yet? Mine are stitch in the ditch and shearing. Let us know in the comments what you're working up to. As we've said, this is a very densely woven fabric, so it can be a struggle to hand sew. It's worth using a thin needle, like the one you would use for silks. I'm also using my silk pins, as they're thinner so as not to bruise the fabrics, and can wiggle through densely woven fabric. Now all the sleeve drama has passed, we go on to arranging our side pieces. Right sides together, matching the side seams, stitching, then pressing seams open and flat. Then with right sides together, pin sleeve to the lower edge of the armhole, matching the underarm seams and notches. We should now have our two side pieces with our sleeve attached and our centre front piece. We then pin our side pieces to the centre front with right sides together, matching our notches, and then stitching in place. It's always good practice to start at the top of the project and sew down, and if it becomes uneven at the hem, it can just be evened out. However, it's slightly more difficult to mend if it becomes uneven at the armhole. This is our progress, our sides attached to our front piece. However, we now tackle the shoulder gathers. Pulling the gathers to fit to the top of the armhole. Now a word of warning. I forgot to flip my sleeve piece when cutting out, as they are cut on a single layer of fabric. So I now have one sleeve that's slightly less poofy than the other, as I had to unpick it and sew it the right way round. Thankfully, you can't tell if this fabric has a right side or a wrong side, so only me and you will know. Don't tell anyone else. I'm a huge believer in sharing mistakes. It helps those who are starting on their sewing adventures to not give up when they encounter difficulty, and it helps others feel more confident in their own makes. When stitching, we want to stop when we hit the first side seam to keep those lines crisp, and reinforcing at the large dots, keeping those gathers straight and even. Just want to take a quick break here at the halfway mark to talk about our wonderful community here at Minerva. We really want to encourage everyone to take up something crafty. At the top right of the post, you will be able to follow Minerva and keep up to date with offers, new releases, general fabric prettiness, and of course tutorials, sew-alongs, and our top pattern picks. Let us know what you would like to see next. Comment below. We love to hear what you think. We now move on to our lining. If you haven't added a length to the outside of the fabric, you will need to trim the hem of your lining pieces by 1/2 inch. And then we're making them up in the same way as we made up our dress. This is our progress. We have our fully made up outer dress with our delightfully poofy sleeves. And we have our lining ready to be attached. To attach the lining to our dress looks complicated, but by taking it slowly and checking before we stitch, it's going to work. Turn both the lining and the outer dress wrong sides out, and then turn the right sleeve to the inside. Then attach the lining right arm to right arm, with the right side of the lining facing the sleeve side of the seam allowance of the underarm of the dress. We're matching the underarm seam, then the two notches. If you're unsure whether things are going to turn out the right way, baste in place first and then flip it right sides out, just to double check. Basting is a lot easier to take out than little machine stitches and causes a lot less damage to delicate fabrics. We sew the armhole in two sections. First, the underside up to the end of the large dots where the sides meet the front and back sections, keeping the seam allowance up, and making sure to stitch within the seam allowance. This is hopefully the result. Our lining attached to the bottom of our armhole. Then attach the top of the lining to the top of the sleeve head in a similar way, with right sides to the sleeve side of the seam allowance, matching shoulder seams, starting and stopping at the side seams. By making sure we keep that side seam allowance out the way as we stitch the armhole, we make sure we have a smooth, straight band going all the way down our dress. Now we have an entire armhole attached to an entire lining. Yay! Separating the lining and dress and bringing the lining over to the left, anchor the right side of the lining to the sleeve side of the seam allowance. Again, matching the underarm seam and our notches to make sure everything stays even. And then we stitch the lower left armhole as we did with the right, starting and stopping at the side seams. Then flip up the armhole and pin the upper armhole edges to match the top shoulder seam, matching notches and the top of our shoulder seams. And then we stitch our final bit of lining and dress together, stopping and starting at the side seams, making sure not to catch the seam allowance. After all our armholes have been stitched together, we can go ahead and trim their seam allowance to make sure we don't have any bulky seams. We then flip everything inside in and admire our pretty lining. We also admire the progress we've made and get ready for our neck facing. Here I recommend doing a step I accidentally skipped. With wrong sides together, match notches and shoulder seams and run a basting stitch 1/4 inch from the raw edges. Stitch centre back seam of neck binding with right sides together, fold in half lengthwise with wrong sides together and give it a good press. On the outside, pin binding to neck edge, right sides together, matching notches and matching the small dots on the neckband to the shoulder seams. Stretch it lightly to fit the neck edge, making sure the pressure is even. Stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then turn binding inside over the seam. Again, if you're a sensible sewist, pull binding over the first stitch line and stitch in the ditch on the outside of your garment, or slip stitch it in place within the seam allowance. Then hem our 2 layers and part 1 is complete. Now for the hard part. I'm joking. We now start on the sash. We're going to stitch the two sash pieces right sides together, both our outer sash fabric and our inner interlining fabric. After trimming the seams, pin interlining to the wrong side of the belt, raw edges even, and baste round the edges and then trim the interlining close to the basting line. Fold the belt in half lengthways with right sides together and stitch, making sure to leave a 2 to 4 inch space in your stitching, somewhere convenient to turn everything inside out. Even though it's a long thin bit of fabric we're sewing together, it can twist if the edges aren't even. As a hint, if it's twisted when it's inside out, it's going to be twisted when it's right side out. And if you hold the length up while it's pinned and it's not hanging dead straight, then repin and try again. The same idea works for ties and similar projects. For the interlining, we recommend using a cotton lawn, preferably one matching the colour of the outer fabric of your sash. Before turning right side out, trim the corners of the sash to give those really sharp points. For turning right side out, I like to use the blunt end of a sewing needle just to push everything through. This is something I always find really fun and enjoy doing, as it's like a surprise, even though you know what you're turning right side out. For the sash, I ended up using the really nice viscose challis, but it ended up having a little bit too much stretch. So I recommend using any of the fabrics listed on the back of the pattern for the sash. To finish, slip stitch close our opening that we used to turn everything right side out. Then all we have to do is top stitch to our preferred level of top stitching. And there we have it, the swishy, poofy sleeved red dress I've always wanted. I love this lightweight look that is so perfect for summer, or it can be wrapped up a bit with a leather jacket and some thick tights and boots for the colder months. It's such a lovely shape it can be worn without the sash as a kind of buffet gown, or with the sash to really draw in the waist. Here at Minerva, we love to hear your views. What would you like to make with this heavenly crepe? What fabric would you use for this simplicity pattern? Any questions, comment below, and we'd be happy to answer them. And don't forget, Minerva Craft Club members get a 10% discount for 12 months when they sign up. And creating a free account, you'll get a welcome present of a discount coupon. So join us with our lovely community of makers, follow, comment and like, and we'll see you next time.